lend an ear.
Hear us now.
Captain Franz at the helm so steer. Gather round the partnership's deck.
Schrepf's command.
Tales from the leaders of the partnership train. So we chant by the podcast glow. Through veritable seas to boxes flow. Dar or die. Hoist the sail.
All right, welcome everybody to another episode of The Partnership. In our last episode, we talked with Nick Valuri from Dropbox about the different ways you can build integrations, because these days companies have over 130 different technology tools in their tech stack. I just talked with Jan before, and the number changes, but it's definitely a lot of tools that everybody has. And so one of the solutions that I talked about with Nick was iPaaS platforms, integrations platforms as a service. And so I'm incredibly excited today to be joined by Jan Arendtsz, the CEO of Celigo, which is the leading iPaaS platform on G2, like the number one rated on G2, and also mentioned as a visionary in the Garnder Magic Quadrant. Jan and his team raised over $80 million already to help enterprises automate their workflows better. And so I'm incredibly excited for this conversation today to learn more about iPaaS providers. So thanks for joining, Jan.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for the awesome intro.
Yeah. So I did some research on this episode, and I thought your story was so phenomenal because you actually founded a company as a way to scratch your own itch. And so I would love to start maybe with just an introduction on Celigo and the origin story behind your company.
Sure. So as you alluded to, I started a consulting company, ran it for about 5-6 years around just the concept of business processes, especially back office business processes that tie to an ERP, so on and so forth. And we got to a decent scale, about 100 employees. We had specific practices around certain ecosystems. And then we had a fairly strong focus on integration. And we used to go build our own integrations. We had a rudimentary platform that we ran in the cloud. And then, of course, one thing led to another, and it became pretty apparent that the consulting business could be massive, but there was a much bigger opportunity, and that was to start a SaaS company, a platform company, where customers, ISVs can come in and automate their various different integration use cases. And so that's what we ended up doing in 2011.
Yeah. How many people did you employ at your consultancy at the time when you decided to make that shift?
I think, just going by memory, I think we had roughly slightly over 100 employees before we decided to make that pivot. So it took a while to make that pivot and shut down the consulting business and focus entirely on a SaaS product. But I think as you alluded to, the beauty of that was that you learned about the business problem while getting paid as a consultancy. And you really understand that business problem. And that, in my opinion, is priceless. Yeah.
I mean, you were your own customer, basically. You dog-fooded the product. But it must have been still tricky to shift such a big company with already 100 people to a completely new product. How did you make that decision, or how did you communicate that with the team?
By the way, it's one of several pivots that we've made, and that's part of our story, I suppose, part of our DNA. Again, not by intention. I don't think anyone really sets out to have a brilliant plan to say, I'm going to run a consulting company for 5 years to go learn about the business problem, and then I'm going to shut it down and go start a SaaS company. This is how you just follow your instincts, you see the signals, and you end up getting there. But to answer your question, it's you ultimately have to make some hard decisions. You have to figure out, for example, if you have a number of consultants, what do you do with all those consultants? Because in time, until your product really gets to a certain stage, you don't need professional services at that scale, right? So some hard decisions we had to go through, but we also parallel tracked it. And instead of just one fine day shutting the business down and starting a new business, we had an overlap so that we could grow into it, which I think was one of the better things we did as part of that transition.
Yeah, I can imagine that must have been a difficult decision. I wanted to give a quick shout out to Lincoln, who joined us in the chat from the UK, and he's working with an iPaaS provider. So this is a really relevant conversation. I'm glad this is a very timely conversation for many, I think, because so many people are trying to figure out like how to integrate their tool stacks. And so that would be my first question for you as well, Jan. When should a company build native integrations versus leverage an iPaaS provider? Like if I am a customer of yours, for example, or just a startup company itself, and I have a tool stack of over 130 different products, how do I decide which integrations to leverage or what tools to leverage to connect all of these products?
And just to be clear, I think the question you're asking is for a company that wants to automate its internal business processes.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. So great question. It really comes down to, well, to state the obvious, every company is going to be different and the circumstances are different. But in general, what we've seen is that when you are early on in your journey as a company, you end up acquiring a bunch of SaaS applications. Typically, the smaller SaaS apps need to connect to the larger ones, which we call foundational SaaS apps. So think of like a CRM, an ERP, an HCM, an IT service management type apps. These are the system of record for key business objects in the enterprise, such as the lead, the account, the contact, the sales order, the employee, the vendor, so on and so forth, right? Yep. And so smaller SaaS apps that go deep within a certain function need access maybe to the lead record or to the employee record. And so as a consequence, they need to be able to connect and get access to it, and they typically go build it because that's what's needed for them to go sell their product. Okay, so now a given company goes in and starts buying a bunch of these apps. Initially, there's a pre-built integration. You've tested it when you were in the sales cycle. It seems to get the job done, so on and so forth. That's great. The pivotal moment, though, is when a company starts moving to some of these foundational SaaS apps. They go from a payroll system to a true HCM. They go from a QuickBooks to a proper ERP. They get Salesforce at some point. And that is a compelling event, which then makes them really think hard about, well, how's this all going to work? Because if I have a number of these foundational SaaS apps and lots of these mid-size and smaller apps, if you rely solely on the native integrations, and by the way, there aren't native integrations for every possible use case either. So even if you took that path, in certain cases, you're forced to go consider building some of these use cases, the workflows yourself. But at some point, you get to a certain inflection point where it starts to become a little bit more brittle. And that's a natural, compelling event for a company to think about an iPaaS.
Yeah, it rings a bell because as a ISV myself, like working at an ISV, like it is true that you always need to integrate with these single sources of truth, like the Salesforce, as you said, like the ERP, like all these like foundational products, as you mentioned, as a way to actually sell your product. Like normally it's just part of the RFP from like a customer that you need to like check the box that you have this integration. But I assume, like to your point, like these integrations will be limited. Like it is tempting as an ISV to just like tick a box and say like, yes, we have a Salesforce integration, but then actually what your Salesforce integration can do might not be exactly what the company needs as it scales. And so there will be a need for an additional like business automation software.
Yeah. So just to double click on that for a second. So one scenario is that ISV could have built an integration, but the number of use cases, the breadth of it is not what it needs to be. There might be some other additional workflows that are missing in that integration. That's one example. A second example is the depth of it, the existing use cases. It might do the job. It might be like the 80-20 rule where it works for 80% of the time, but for some of the edge cases, it doesn't work well. When you get into that realm, then you say, well, how can I tweak this particular workflow to make that do what I want it to do. And then oftentimes, not all the time, but pretty much, I would say 9 out of 10 times, you hit a brick wall because that integration cannot be customized beyond that. Even simple things like saying, I need to access a custom field on within this business object. So that becomes hard to do. And then the third component that we see often is the stuff runs, but you don't have great visibility into how well it's working. If there was an error, is it handled properly? What's the effort you have to put into as an administrator of this integration to make it truly work? And this is where you really start getting into the realm of an iPaaS, because let's face it, right? Those native integrations, they are, as you pointed out, more of a check the box type exercise.
Yeah, exactly. It's something which is basically part of your marketing material often, because you have to have it. Otherwise, you're not able to compete in the market.
Precisely.
I wanted to give a quick shout out to James, who joined us from New Hampshire. I like the satellite dish. And then we also have Lola, who joined us from Atlanta, Georgia, as well. And Lola is currently building customer-facing integrations full-time. So this is, again, a very timely topic. We did have a question from Lincoln in the audience. Did you continue to run a portion of your managed services parallel to the new direction as a value add when you made the switch to the product?
No, we didn't. We just had a wind down period. In my opinion, back then, and especially right now, it's literally impossible to focus on two different business models, especially when you're small, especially when you're bootstrapped. You got to make the hard call, and you're going to say, this is what we want to do. We're going to be all in. We're not going to hedge our bets. The only reason we kind of overlap was to be able to wind it down.
Yeah. How did you balance that though? I guess like, especially your existing customers might be used to you doing a lot of the services for you. So, or for them. So how did you balance like the customer, or explain to the customer that they now are in charge of their own, integrations or business automations? You won't do like all the heavy lifting for them anymore.
Yeah, there was a transition path for, and look, when we converted to a SaaS company, there was only a limited number of such integrations running where we were managing it, so it was not really a big concern.
Okay, that's good. So then when you build Celigo, like we talked about iPaaSes in general, like what makes Celigo different from other iPaaS solutions or other iPaaS platforms out there?
Sure. So first off, it's what we call a next generation iPaaS. The part that I didn't tell you about, which is I think the more interesting part of our history, not the consulting company, even though that's pretty interesting, is we started the SaaS company and ran it for 5 years, and then came to the conclusion that, a very painful conclusion, that our product didn't quite meet the needs of the rapidly evolving market space.
Mm-hmm.
And without getting into all the details, we made a super hard decision to go build a brand new product, start with a blank canvas. This was back in 2015. So for all practical purposes, this company was really founded in 2015. If you look at our customer base, pretty much every single customer has been acquired since then. Mm-hmm. All right. So the reason I mentioned this is also we had 2 goes at building a product and finding product market fit. The first go around, we killed it, even though we could have continued to build on it. We were a little bit more ambitious. And the reason is we wanted to build the next generation iPaaS, where we envisioned both an IT type user, an integration specialist, a developer type persona building these workflows, as well as what we call a business technologist, someone who is living and breathing these business processes, really understand the underlying apps. They know what needs to be done. They are the author of the solution in a certain way, because they're trying to solve a business problem. We wanted them to also be able to come in and be part of the process. And by that, I mean be able to go ahead and build certain types of workflows, or at least start it. And if the APIs are fairly complex, then be able to turn it over to a more IT-centric type role. Mm-hmm. but also the management, the ongoing maintenance. We didn't want this to be a pure IT play, even though we still predominantly sell to an IT team. We want to make sure that other non-IT users can be part of the process so that it's not single-threaded. So I would say that's the biggest advantage that we have, where we are this next generation, very easy to use, intuitive user interface. You don't have to go through a massive training class or go through tons of documentation to start using our product. It's designed, if you know what you want to do, you should be able to come in, sign up for an account, get started, and start building stuff.
Yeah, that's great to hear, because I feel like there are too often are gatekeepers which make the process of integrating software seem really difficult. So oftentimes when you have an iPaaS, like in our experience, at least we used an iPaaS and Hopin, and there was always like an extra consultant we had to hire who actually like then managed the tool, rather than me as the partnerships person or somebody in business operations actually going in and then, using the tool themselves. And I feel like that is like a big barrier to actually just, creating like less slack in the system in your company, because you want everybody actually to understand how to operate and like how to automate and how to improve your business operations.
Yeah, that's a key metric for us, by the way, is to understand how many users within an enterprise are active users. And without getting into specific metrics, let's say that there's a direct correlation between the number of users. The more users, the stickier the product is, and the more workflows that they're going to end up building. So this is just such a key part of it. But having said that, we also understand some businesses, especially smaller businesses, may not have the bandwidth to have the resources internally, and then they have to find other ways, such as getting consultants to come in, or even really large companies where they are lacking bandwidth, let's say from an IT perspective. So we see the whole gamut.
Yeah. Before we go into my next question, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Naresh, who just joined us in the chat and said, "Awesome topic." So as you can see, this is a hot topic in the partnerships world right now. So for my next question, then, like, who should own the iPaaS? Like you said, maybe it's a consultant, maybe it's IT, maybe it's product. Like, how do you structure who owns the iPaaS? And maybe we can zoom out a level further as well. Is it each individual ISV who should own an iPaaS and then build integrations for their software with all the other foundational, products, for example? Or is it each customer who can just say, hey, you know what? I don't trust the ISVs to build good integrations for me. I want to be in charge of my own workflow automations and make them exactly the way I want. So I should own the iPaaS as well.
Yeah, great question. So again, there's no right answer per se, but let me try and break it down. And I think this is a good topic to dig into. Mm-hmm. First off, as you pointed out, there are two models, right? The typical model is a company buys an iPaaS, typically led by the IT team, BizOps team, so on and so forth, to build workflows to automate various different business processes in the enterprise, internal business processes, some external. The second model, as you pointed out, is for a software company, typically a SaaS company. Mm-hmm. They need to connect out of the box with a number of other applications, and they need to build 1, 2, 3, in certain cases, 10 or 15 different integrations. And instead of getting their customers to go build those integrations, because if you have thousands of customers and those thousands of customers are all building the same integration, that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So they want to be able to go build it. So let's start on that side of the house. So they have a couple of choices. They can either use APIs directly, fully baked into the product, and they can go build some of these integrations that they need, especially the critical ones that prevent them from making certain sales and adds friction to the sales cycle. Mm-hmm. Over the years, then there was a small cottage industry, so to speak, that came up where this concept of an embedded iPaaS, where the product team of a product company, a SaaS company, looks around to find an iPaaS that they can embed within their product to go build some of these integrations and offer these integrations to their end customers. And again, there are pros and cons there, but so that's one model. And then of course we talked about the typical internal usage, IT team managing this, so on and so forth. So I think your question is, if I am the ultimate end customer, what's best for me? Do I rely on the SaaS products that I buy to have all the integrations that I need, or should I go buy an iPaaS and build all those integrations myself? And as you can imagine, the way I'm setting this up, it's not binary, it's not black or white. The truth lies somewhere in the middle. And I often get asked this question from various different external parties, including our customers, partners, as to what's the right mix. And look, my simple answer is, if a native integration out of the box from a specific ISV is working pretty well, don't waste your time trying to replace that. Let it run until you scale the business, and eventually you're going to find that that's just not going to scale as quickly as you need it to scale. And that becomes the time for you to start thinking about replacing that particular iPaaS or particular native integration. So we have a maturity model, by the way, where we really map this out. And if you're on the other end of the spectrum, once you've reached a certain scale, let's say it's a company of a certain size, it's got about 100 different SaaS applications, and you have a number of these native integrations running, you go, okay, at a certain point, it becomes chaotic, because all these native integrations don't know about the existence of the other native integrations, right? Because each ISV, if you have 100 SaaS apps and each ISV has built their own set of integrations, they don't know about the existence of the other. So if you don't have a single pane of glass to go manage that whole thing. And that's the compelling event, the inflection point that comes into play often when companies really look at this and go, I need better control of my own destiny. I need to get an iPaaS. And by the way, just because I got an iPaaS doesn't mean that I'm going to go replace everything. I'm going to start supplementing that by building out these key business processes that need to be automated using that iPaaS. So that's typically what we see.
Yeah. What are the factors influencing your maturity model? Like you just alluded to it. Like, what are the factors that influence the maturity model of when somebody should own the iPaaS versus like outsource integration development to the ISV? Because it seems pretty tempting, like letting the ISV just build like integrations and then using them out of the box. There's no additional the team member required. There's no additional like developer need or something like that. Versus like if you have an iPaaS in house, there might be somebody who actually needs to administrate it.
Yeah. So by the way, the maturity model is not necessarily driven by whether you should run the native integrations or you should get an iPaaS. It's how mature are you as an organization to when you think about the topic of integrating your enterprise. Are you on one end, the immature end is really driven by you're reactive. You have an acute pain point. You need to connect your front office and back office, what we call a quote to cash type business process. Orders from that you've just closed in your CRM need to get into the back office so that you can bill it or ship it. And that's all you're focused on. You're not really thinking about a connected enterprise with the best possible automation, with the best possible ROI, which, by the way, is the other end of the spectrum, where you think about integration not necessarily as an afterthought, but more as a first-class citizen. You spend so much time thinking about the apps that you want to buy. You also think about integration and a connected enterprise, a fully automated enterprise in a similar vein. So those are the two bookends. And as you can imagine, a lot of customers kind of fall there in the middle, many shades of gray.
Yeah. When you talk to customers, or at least when I talk to potential partners or customers about iPaaS solutions, there's one problem which they frequently mention to me, and that is what they call the black box. it's basically the idea that like when you have like an iPaaS which automates your workflows, the data goes in and then it comes out on the other side in the app, on the like app you're connecting, but it doesn't actually tell you like what's going to happen with the data in between, like how long is it going to take to process, etc. Like it just feels like there isn't a lot of control over it. When you have these conversations with customers and this issue comes up, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that they need to consider an enterprise grade iPaaS. And I'm being a little bit facetious there, but not entirely. If it is a true iPaaS, then you have control on every step of that workflow in excruciating detail. You decide exactly how it's going to work. This was not something that was built for you, that you inherited, and someone's put a box around it and given you some controls around it. You built this yourself, and you will have that granular control to do anything and everything, including when it's running, to understand what happened. I think reading between the lines, some of the things that you're saying might be, for example, you want to kick off a workflow based on some upstream event, and you make a call to an API to the iPaaS and say, all right, I built that workflow, go ahead and kick it off. But sometimes it might take a minute or 5 minutes before it's going to kick it off. That's, I would say, a deficiency of that particular iPaaS, because if you're an enterprise grade iPaaS, you have the ability to handle things in absolute real time as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely, the issue comes up more often with like non-enterprise grade iPasses. So I see that there is a difference here. Like one of the examples I always mention is, for example, with Zapier, we were in the events business. If somebody registered on their registration platform, the email address came in, and then we were supposed to send them an invite so they can join the event. But that was oftentimes a black box. Like we wouldn't know if it would happen like within a minute or within 15 minutes, etc. And these were the kind of issues we personally dealt with. I'm sure there are a lot of industry specific issues people will have as well. And so how do you like navigate that? How do you navigate these like industry specific issues and make sure that you actually like work well with all kinds of different platforms versus just like one niche industry like events or like HR or something like that?
Yeah, my take on this is it is not industry specific. That has nothing to do with it. Ultimately, you're dealing with you're in the business. We're in the business of connecting various data sources and apps together. And it really comes down to the APIs. And yes, some APIs can be a little bit gnarly to use and have certain consequences. But if you're a true, what we call a horizontal iPaaS that can connect anything with anything, it has nothing to do with industry, and you should be able to do it, and you should have that exact control that you need.
Yeah. I guess it is a tough spot to be in because you're only ingesting what is coming from the APIs of the other platforms. So it is also dependent on how good these APIs are and how good the ISVs are actually maintaining that infrastructure.
So I think the way we talk about that is, yes, the payload that comes from a given API, what's inside the envelope, we don't control.
Yeah.
But you can use our tool to then filter that data, do all kinds of additive stuff to that data, to shape that data to fit the final objective or the final destination that you want to be able to get to. So again, if it's an enterprise grade iPaaS, you should be able to do that. And by the way, I don't mean to put Zapier down, but Zapier is not really considered to be a true iPaaS, right? It works more at the user level. You as an employee of an organization need to automate a certain task, and you decide to sign up for Zapier. That's predominantly their model. Great product, great company. In fact, we have plenty of our customers using Zapier side by side because it's more at that personal level whereas everything that we do runs at a company level, not at the
Yeah.
individual level. So that's a big distinction.
Yeah, it's great to know though that there are different flavors of iPaaS for each kind of individual user within a company or each user's needs. We are running out of time, so I just want to like touch on one last topic, which I'm sure you're being asked about a lot, and that is AI. How do you think AI will impact the iPaaS market in the future?
Sure. So it goes without saying that every software company on the planet is thinking about AI, and I'm happy to say that we started our AI journey back in 2019, where we really focused on certain areas of the product. And real quick, I'll just break this down. The way I see the world of AI and how we can use AI within the product falls into roughly 3 big buckets. One is using AI to help users build workflows as quickly as possible. The second is once you've built a workflow and it's in production, that flow is going to run hundreds of times, millions of times over several years. How can we make that experience as easy as possible in terms of managing some of the errors that you encounter, classifying that, getting into what we call an autopilot mode and self-healing those errors so that the cost of running this integration, the human labor needed, is minimal. And that's the area that we focused over the last 5 years in our first foray into AI, and it has been spectacular in terms of the results and the ROI for our customers. And then the third bucket is using AI in other smart ways within the product to be able to describe what's happening within a workflow in English-like language, to be able to go build connectivity with new apps so that we can have named connectors. We use AI in a multitude of ways. Right now, our focus is on that first bucket. How do we make every step of a workflow as easy as possible, where you can be chatting with a bot to tell it what you want it to do for that particular step? And then, of course, the ultimate place that we are heading towards is to be able to, instead of building a workflow yourself, you come in and you speak to the AI interface and say, this is what I'd like to do today. Go ahead and please build this for me. Not only build it, but help me test it and help me put it into production. So it's not like a check the box type endeavor for us. It's ultimately, we want to be able to truly have that experience where someone can truly, literally speak to your computer and have a conversation and have the platform go do everything for you and be able to take you as close to the finish line as possible.
Yeah, that's great to hear, because I feel like if you ask customers what they want from an integration, they all know. They're like, I want this field to go in from this app into this app. So they can describe it, but they can't actually build it out themselves, or they often struggle with interfaces, etc.
Yeah, and you have to keep in mind where there are very simple use cases and there are super complicated use cases. And so we have to be realistic there. It's not hard to automate and have AI go build the really simple use case. But if you have tons of business logic and you're touching 5-6 apps and it really has built-in complexity, that becomes a harder problem to solve. But we will solve that too.
Yeah, I have no doubt. This was great. Thanks so much for joining us today, Jan. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk us through iPaaS in general and Celigo in specific. And I also want to give a shout out to Lincoln, James, Lola, and Naresh, who joined us live today. You could have been anywhere and you chose to spend this time with us, so I really appreciate that. If you have any other questions, Jan, where can people find you and follow your journey?
I can be found on LinkedIn, easiest way. I'm the only Jan Arendtsz on LinkedIn. Super easy.
Perfect. Okay, make sure to follow Jan on LinkedIn, and then we will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of The Partnership. See you then.
Thanks, Franz.
Hark now, mates, lend an ear.
Hear us now.
Captain Franz at the helm, so steer. Gather round the partnership's deck.
Schrepf's command.
Tales from the leaders of the partnership train. So we chant by the podcast glow. Through wearable seats to boxes flow. our Hoist the sail.